In this video, I'm going to walk you through every node in this composition. And I'm going to explain everything the best that I can and go slow and help you understand the concepts behind why the heck I did what I did. Let's do it. I'm in the Fusion page of DaVinci Resolve, and we have this shot, which we're going to add the meteor and explosion and all of that stuff into. I'm going to go up to Workspace and uncheck Show Page Navigation, so we have a little bit more room here because I'm going to be going through the nodes. Oh, baby. Here's kind of an overview of our node graph. And this isn't the most organized thing. I did the thing where you don't clean up before your friends come over. I'm not going to clean up before I hang out with you. You know why? I do what I want, because I'm a gangster. As gangster as you could possibly be, talking about nodes and things of that nature. All right, let's get into it. First of all, this was shot in 6K RAW on the Blackmagic Pocket Cinema Camera 6K. And it comes in as log like this. We transcoded this to 1080p. Now, why? Why would we do that? Well, the big reason is it's just easier to play back, easy to deal with. And the truth about a lot of visual effects stuff is that you can work at a smaller resolution and nobody notices. Nobody cares. Yeah, baby. So this is a 1080p. This is a DNX HR HQ444, I think is what it is. And it's in log. But we're going to do our compositing under a LUT. And so this is just a preview LUT that lives in the Fusion viewer. So in the upper right-hand corner, you can click on this little lattice thing and go down and pick a LUT that works for your camera. So I picked Blackmagic Design, Blackmagic Gen 5 Film to Video, because that is a pretty good approximation of a color transform that I would put on this in the color page. So I can see what the heck this looks like when it's roughly color graded. Always a really good idea to do that, because if you don't, you're going to be mixing things together and adjusting the colors of elements, and you'll have no idea if it's actually going to look good. One thing I'll even do sometimes is go into the color page and do a rough color grade on something, right click and make a LUT, and then I'll bring it up here in the Fusion page. For instance, GC BMD Gen 5 to Rec 709. That's a pretty good LUT to work under. This is a LUT that I generated that's going to be a lot like how I would color grade this. So it's nice to make some informed decisions there. I'll just switch back to our normal LUT here, which has a little bit less contrast, which is probably why I ran into that problem that I'm going to go into in a little bit. So really the first thing we do is I brought this into a tracker, and this is just a normal tracker, a 1-point tracker. And I selected this building in the background and track the motion. Okay. There is just a little bit of motion in this shot. It kind of just shaking because it was a really windy day. And so the wind's kind of just shaking the camera a little bit. And so we're just tracking a feature that's really far away like this. Then we can use that tracking info to stabilize the shot, which I'm doing in this transform too. Now, if I scroll back and forth, we can see that this is pretty well stabilized. So I'm just going to rename this Stab XF. Yes. The way that I did that was I just made a new transform node. And here under center, you can right click and say connect to tracker one steady position. This. And that's just going to link that center to the steady position of the tracker, which is pretty much what it would use if you use the tracker to stabilize things. But you can just do this in a separate node and it works great. Now, why would I do this instead of the tracker node? Well, the tracker node under operation, we have match move, corner position, perspective positioning. We don't really have a stabilize. And so this is just a quick way to do it. Next, we have transform 3. All that this is doing is just zooming it in a little bit so that when our stabilization moves the image around, we don't see any edges. It's just zooming it in just a little bit. And so at this point, all we're doing is just getting this shot locked down. We're not really going to track anything to this. We just use the tracker to reverse the motion of the camera so that we have a locked down shot and it isn't kind of jiggling. Next, I brought this into Magic Mask. That's because I'm going to put some stuff in the background here, and I wanted to roto out this hat. So all I did was just kind of draw all over this hat like this, and it's going to isolate the hat with Magic Mask. If you don't know what Magic Mask is, this is a way to easily select things like this that's only available in the studio version of Resolve. Now that we have our selection made, you can track this back and forth just using this track back and forth button, and it will do a pretty good job of doing a rough kind of rotoscope selection of whatever you had selected. And so all I did was just make a selection like that. So here we have this entire clip just roughly selected. And from here, you can do a lot of stuff. So, I mean, you could go into the matte and blur it, which is probably a good idea. Erode it and dilate it and that kind of thing. But I actually ended up this time not blurring it and just exporting a matte that looks like this. So what I did was I hit Shift Spacebar and typed Saver. And what a Saver node does is it takes whatever image you plug into it and it will render an image sequence. So it's just rendering something out, which is really great for stuff like Magic Mask. When you make your selection and you like it, you can kind of save it to disk so it doesn't have to keep thinking about Magic Mask over and over again. You'll also avoid kind of some bugs and problems and stuff that come up with it constantly thinking about Magic Mask. You'll have less render problems, that kind of thing. You can just save that out to an image sequence. And so what I do is just connect a saver to it, go up to File, Browse, pick a place for my matte, and I'll save this as an OpenEXR file. OpenEXR is a very high quality still image that's used a lot in visual effects. And now that we have that, I can go up to Fusion and click Render All Savers. And what that will do is go through every single frame of our composition and it will render out a separate image for each frame. Then you can bring that in, which we'll do in a couple minutes, and then you can bring that in like footage. And then you can use that in the same way that you would use an isolated element like we're making with Magic Mask, but you don't have the overhead of Fusion thinking about Magic Mask over and over again. It's just an image with an alpha channel. So now that we've done all that, I'm going to put this into a color space transform. Now, what the heck is happening here? If I turn off our LUT, what we're doing is we're putting this into linear space. And so we're going from our input color space, Blackmagic Design Wide Gamut Gen 4.5, input gamma, Blackmagic Design Film Gen 5, into DaVinci Wide Gamut Linear. DaVinci Wide Gamut is a color space that's really big. You have a lot of room to move your colors around, and the output gamma is linear. If you don't really understand what that means, it's okay. You can kind of think of this as converting the image from something that looks good into something that Fusion can think about in a easier way. When you shoot a log image, something that's really black isn't going to look black on screen. Something that's bright white isn't going to look bright white on screen. And something that's halfway between white and black isn't necessarily going to be like 50% gray. Something that in real life is 50% gray might be like 75% gray when you record into log space. And so it's storing those values of brightness in a way that doesn't relate them to each other in a linear way. Something that's 80% brightness might only be just a little bit brighter than something that's 50% brightness, which is not how things work in the real world. So rather than mess with all of that foolishness, so what we're doing is we're taking this log footage and we're plotting all of the brightnesses along a linear graph. And so things that are really, really dark are going to appear really dark, okay? Something that's really bright is going to be really bright. And something that's exactly halfway between the brightness here and the brightness here is going to look half as bright on screen. So it's easy for Fusion to figure out kind of how images go together. If you have two images that are linear, they'll combine together in a way that's actually more realistic than if you were taking an image in a log space and an image in a non-log space and trying to put them together. The contrast and colors aren't really going to talk to each other very well. So we're putting it in a linear space so we can combine all the other elements. It's like making a common language for all of the images to speak to each other with, okay? The unfortunate part is that it looks really bad. We're not really supposed to look at an image in linear space. It's just like in compositing mode. So what we do, I'll just turn off some of these other nodes here, is down the line before we export this image, we run this through another color space transform that does exactly the opposite. It goes from DaVinci Wide Gamut Linear back into our log space, like this. And so now I can actually select both of these nodes, and if I disable them, there's no difference at all. Because all we're doing is converting it to one thing and then converting it back, and it does it with perfect math. And in between these color space transforms, that's where we combine other images, where we merge other images with this image. And because it's in linear space, it's going to mesh together a little bit better, okay? Since we have our color space in log, I can turn my LUT back on, and this is kind of what it's going to look like when we render it, right? Okay, but now that we're in linear space, like this, we're going to put some elements over it. I am going to view this in our log space with our LUT applied, but just know that this is happening kind of before that. We're going to take our Meteor, which is a render, I assume, probably from Houdini, but this is a stock element that I downloaded. And the first thing we're going to do is turn this into linear space. So now we're kind of translating the color space of this render, which is Rec 709, into our linear space. And I'm doing a little bit of luminance mapping here to kind of adjust what it's considering to be bright and dark and that kind of thing, which is something you can do if you have Rec 709 footage, because it's just not as scientific as using like a log space and coming from like a color science perspective. It's just an image that looks good on screen. And so you sometimes have to do a little bit more work to adjust this, but then we have this in linear space, which again, this isn't going to look like this. This is in compositing mode, right? So I'm just going to disable some of these nodes and view our color space transform here with our LUT. And so now we're placing this over our footage, but we need to adjust some things. So I have a color corrector here. I'm going to adjust some of those colors, make them work a little better with our color grade here. Then we're adding just a tiny bit of blur, and then we're transforming this and putting this exactly where it's supposed to be, right? But this shouldn't be in front of the field. That's like a paradox thing. If it's going to crash on the other side of the field, it needs to be occluded by these leaves. So down here, let me just move this around to make a little bit more sense here. The first thing we're doing is we're bringing in our matte. So this is the hat matte. This is just that render that I made with the EXRs of the hat. And again, I probably could have blurred this, and it probably would have been a little easier just to blur this and then render it out, but I wanted to be tricky. I don't know what I was thinking, but I'm taking this render with an alpha and I'm just using it as a matte. If I hit A, I can view the alpha here, and you'll see that the edges are really, really rough. And so what I ended up doing was running this through a node called Alpha Matte Shrink and Grow. And that's just going to kind of like squish it down a little bit. So here's before, here's after. It's just kind of like choking that matte down. Then I put it through a blur. And so that's just a regular blur on that matte. And again, this probably could have been done easier with the controls for my matte inside of the Magic Mask, but that's okay because we're getting the same basic effect. We have a alpha channel that's this shape and blurry. Okay. Then we're bringing this into a matte control, and you can use a matte control for a bunch of different things. One thing I like to do is combine mattes with a matte control. And so we're going to combine this with a matte that's just a rough mask that I drew around the sky, just kind of roughly drawing a little shape kind of on the edge of these plants and selecting everything above it. So we have this mask that just selects the top half of the screen with this little edge here. And then I'm running this through a turbulent displace, which is a custom tool that I made. And it's really just a mixture of a displace, a DSP node like this, and a fast noise node. Plug the fast noise into displace. You plug your image into the yellow input, and then you put fast noise into the displace. The fast noise creates these clouds, and I can just adjust the detail and scale and everything. And the brightness of those clouds is going to adjust how much the displace moves things and where it happens. So now we have this displacement that we're adding to this matte, and I can animate this with see the rate, I could change the scale, whatever I want to do, bring this offset down, the refraction strength up. And so now this kind of like wiggles it. And I'm doing this because we have this wind that's kind of wiggling all of these plants. And rather than animate every single leaf, I'm like, it's probably going to be good enough to just have it wiggle a little bit so it doesn't stand out and just like with a really sharp edge. And so this turbulent displacement, again, it's just a macro that I made with those two nodes. Just makes it a little bit easier because I tend to do this a lot. And so it just wiggles the edge of that matte. And then with this matte control, we combine that matte with the hat, and we take away the hat shape from this white shape. And now everything that's white is where our meteor can go. Everything that's black is where it can't go. So we use this as a mask. This is just the alpha channel of what's coming out of our matte control. Then we're running it through another matte control to just contract it a little bit, which we might have been able to do in the first one actually, but that's okay. Then we can take the output of that And we're going to mask this merge with that matte that we made. So now we have this meteor going down, but it's behind our plants here. And so we have this rough matte that cuts this out. And when you zoom in, it's not super great, but it totally works for a quick shot. And it doesn't stand out too bad because it has that wiggling edge, right? And so far, so good. It's working pretty well. Let's go on to our next element here, which is our dust explosion. This is another element. And we're bringing this through a color space transform. Again, just bringing it into linear, which again makes it look terrible. We'll just kind of turn these off as we go so it's easier to see. And we're putting that in there and we're doing our color space transform, which makes it sit in that image a little bit better. Doing a little bit of color correction to it, adding a little bit of a blur. We're using this transform to actually put it where it's supposed to go. Then we're using this same matte, actually the version that's not choked quite as much, to limit where this thing goes. So without the matte, this would kind of go everywhere, but we can connect this here to our effect mask, and that makes sure that it's behind the hat and behind our field here. So we have both of those combined. We probably could have also merged these together first and then brought them into one merge and then applied that matte to the same merge. It doesn't really matter. The nice thing is you can connect things to multiple things. So great. And then as this is coming down, we're adding a little bit of a glow to it. Just a tiny glow here, and that just makes everything sit in that scene a little better. And I'm masking that with a really soft ellipse. So I'm not putting this glow over everything. I'm just letting it glow kind of right there where the meteor is. Then yeah, we're going from linear space back into our log space, and that's our final image. Now, all this stuff up here is really interesting. So we're starting with a clear background, and then we're adding our elements and masking them, and then putting those out as a separate media out. And these aren't color managed or anything like that. It looks terrible, but if I hit A, then I have a perfect alpha channel that I can use in the color page to adjust the colors of just these elements if I want to. All you have to do is get whatever you want to kind of break out, make sure that it has the right alpha channel, and then plug that into another media out, so media out 2. To get another media out, all you have to do is hit Shift Spacebar and type media out. And you can add one like this. And all these extra media outs you can access from the color page, which is really cool. But our final image looks something like that. For the amount of effort it took, I think it looks pretty good. And if you want to see the magic there, when I go to the color page, all I have to do is right click and say add source. And that'll bring me a second input right here, which if you mouse over, it says media out 2. And now I can do some color correction to just those elements if I want to. So if I don't quite get the colors right, I can do a little bit of adjustment here in the color page just to make sure they look really good under my actual color management, actual color grades and that kind of thing. So yeah, let's review here. We're starting with our log media and we're setting up our preview LUT. We're doing a track and a stabilization and zooming it in. We're selecting just the hat with magic mask and we ended up rendering that out as its own image sequence. We're putting this into linear space, which we later reverse. Then we're putting in element 1 and element 2, each of which have been color managed and color corrected and blurred and transformed to be exactly where they're supposed to be. Put over everything with a merge in linear space. So yeah, we have the meteor and we have the impact stuff. We have a little bit of glow on the meteor. And of course our color management, which we're already kind of looking at. And then that goes into our media out. Then we have these elements by themselves, which make a really nice alpha channel for us to use in the color page and color correct them separately. So this is the stuff I really like. If you enjoy this, you are going to absolutely love Fusion 0 to Hero. If you haven't checked out Fusion 0 to Hero yet, that is our big Fusion Basics course. And it's a fantastic way to start learning this stuff and working with Fusion, even if you're not very familiar with it. But for now, if you are relatively new to Fusion, I'd really recommend checking out our Fusion Survival Guide. This talks about some of the most essential concepts for working in Fusion, things that will save your butt cheeks. It's free. If you don't know me, my name is Casey and I teach Fusion, and I'm really excited that you're here. And then we also have this video that's also really good for you, okay? Okay. That's not good.